Okay, well, hello everyone. We're starting very shortly, but in the meantime, my name's Hadiza, so I'm a senior guide here. So I was once a high school student just like you, and I'm very happy and fortunate to be able to experience this event. Is it anybody's first time at Rideau Hall? Yeah, me too. No, I'm kidding. I work here. Anybody want to share maybe what they thought coming up here? I know that my first thoughts when I came to the ballroom was that it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at the chandelier. You know, extremely beautiful, very bright, and actually it has a very nice history. Does anybody want to guess who gave it to us? It was actually a gift. Any guesses? England? Yes, exactly. So actually it was a gift from Great Britain in 1952. Can somebody guess why they would give us a chandelier? Why would Great Britain give Canada a chandelier? Any guesses? Any perhaps history majors or history buffs here? Well, essentially, if you remember correctly, Great Britain basically gave this chandelier to Canada to thank us for our participation in World War II. And of course, today, you know, we are celebrating National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and we do have our lovely hosts today, Callie and Elise. So maybe they can introduce themselves a little bit or talk more in the meantime.
Yeah, of course. Yes. All right.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Callie Diebold, and I also work here, as you probably guessed, and I've talked to a few of you this morning. So I'm an interpretation and exhibition planner. It's actually a role we both share together. And what we do is we work on the different exhibits, as well as the art here in the room, and various places within the residence, which I'm not going to talk too much about the art in the room today, because, well, we're going to be talking about it a lot very soon. And this is Elise.
Oui, donc enchantée tout le monde. Mon nom est Élise Laporte. Moi aussi, comme Callie, je suis planificatrice en exposition et interprétation ici à Rideau Hall. Si ça peut vous encourager, je n'avais aucune idée que c'était un rôle qui existait dans le passé. Puis mon parcours académique m'a apporté ici. C'est vraiment le plus beau cadeau que j'aurais pu avoir comme poste. So if ever some of you are arts major and art history buffs like I was, there's positions like the ones that we occupy, which is just the most thrilling and fulfilling, and we are so excited to have these types of events with students and be able to use the residents, the art that we have on display at Rideau Hall to really bring people together, which is what Rideau Hall is all about. So we're so excited to have this event with all of you today. On est tellement content de vous accueillir ici à Rideau Hall aujourd'hui pour avoir cet événement si original et si important. Donc, au courant de l'événement, je crois qu'on va passer à travers le déroulement un petit peu tout à l'heure, mais pour vous donner une idée, on va avoir la première composante de l'événement qui va être une session de questions et réponses. Puis on est tellement hâte de savoir, nous on est privilégiés, on a su les questions que vous nous avez passées, mais on a tellement hâte d'entendre les réponses que nos panélistes vont pouvoir répondre. So for this event today, we're just so excited to hear the answers to the questions that you've also thoughtfully prepared. We've been privy to see those questions in advance, and we know that it's going to bring such interesting conversation. So we're so happy that you've contributed so well to this event, and we are extremely, extremely happy that this will all take place today. So the first part will be that Q&A, then we'll proceed to a part that's going to be in another room that you'll be exploring Rideau Hall a little bit today, and that part will present you Métis jigging, so you'll be immersed in that culture. And you'll be coming back to the ballroom a little bit later, where we'll be doing an art activity inspired by a special artwork that we have here at Rideau Hall. Mm-hmm.
So you may have noticed that today's event is going to be in both English and in French. So there are simultaneous interpretation devices available. Just before we get started, is there anyone who didn't get a chance to get a device that would like one? No, you're all good? Okay, just wanted to double check. So for your awareness, for French you go to channel 2, and for English you go to channel 1. And if at any point during the event you do decide that you would like one, we have guides on either side of the room, the ones who will also be passing the mics for those asking questions. So just kind of try to flag them down, and we can bring you an interpretation device if you need it. Okay.
Donc, juste en français, si jamais je peux me permettre de répéter. Donc, on a des casques d'écoute pour l'interprétation simultanée. Donc, si jamais vous voulez avoir bénéficié de cette interprétation et que vous n'avez pas pris un casque d'écoute plus tôt, simplement nous laisser savoir et on peut venir vous chercher, aller vous en récupérer un. Puis, à tout moment, si jamais vous décidez de ne plus avoir besoin, vous pouvez juste le mettre sous votre siège. Avez-vous hâte? We're just about to start. Are you all excited? That's excellent.
So we just again want to say thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. We know today's a very important day, and we're looking forward to the many conversations that we're going to have, both as a group and circulating the room to hear the conversations that you have as well and your point of view about today and the experiences that we hear about.
And this first part might seem a little bit formal, but later on we'll be able to circulate and discuss, so we'll be really looking forward to hearing everyone's perspective on this day and your thoughts and everything that comes to mind about this day. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Before we begin, we'd like to inform you that our official photographers will be taking photos that will be circulating to your teachers after this event. So please, for the time being, refrain from using your cell phones, and please put them on silent mode as well. Donc, avant de débuter, j'aimerais vous informer que notre photographe officiel prendra des photos lors de l'événement qu'on circulera à vos enseignants. Donc, s'il vous plaît, éteindre vos téléphones et ne pas prendre de photos pendant la cérémonie et aussi éteindre votre sonnerie.
So we're about to begin. Please rise for the arrival of the Governor General, accompanied by Mr. Whit Fraser, and our invited guests. Veuillez vous lever pour l'arrivée du gouverneur général, accompagné de Mr. Whit Fraser et nos invités spéciaux.
Thank you so much. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir. Again, it is such a pleasure to welcome all of you to Rideau Hall today to mark National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Il nous fait plaisir de vous accueillir à Rideau Hall pour la Journée nationale de la vérité et la réconciliation. To begin this event, we would like to invite the Governor General to offer opening remarks. Your Excellency.
Good morning. Ulakut. Bonjour. Welcome to the elders, survivors, students, educators, and other guests, dear guests. Ulumi nalunersigata ulungani nunakasimayuit. Bienvenue à Rideau Hall. Quel plaisir de vous recevoir aujourd'hui. I would like to welcome all of you to Rideau Hall, which sits on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is meaningful. This is our history, not just Indigenous history, but Canadian history. When we acknowledge the land this way, we recognize the history of our country began before Confederation and well before the arrival of settlers. It stretches back thousands of years. Reflecting this truth is what it means for history to be inclusive. inclusive history does not mean that we erase what we know. It means adding to history, giving it context and expanding it to include all perspectives. This is part of reconciliation, and that's a lot of the work that I'm doing right now, is through reconciliation between Indigenous people and other Canadians. And this is really seeing the world through different lenses. We all have culturally different lenses, or the way we see things, and that's an important part of who we are. And that is one of the reasons why we are here today, to see things through a different lens. That's what happens with art. Artists help us see the world differently, and you'll be able to do some fun stuff today with art to show with our guests here. So look around you. At Rideau Hall, you will see, I think you're going to have a little informal tour around Rideau Hall later, so you'll be able to see some of the Indigenous art that really includes many different perspectives. Let's say 30 or 40 years ago, if you had been here, you might not have seen very much Indigenous art. But today, we're starting to change that, because as a country, we have become more inclusive of who we are as a people. All cultures are different, and all have to be welcomed and included in our daily lives. So Indigenous art starts with conversations. It encourages reflection. It supports healing. I was recently in Halifax, and I went to a center where they do mental health support for young people, and they were using art as a way of telling their story, and it showed that it really does help individuals to heal. So art is a very important part of our lives. And I think now we are exposing Canadians to really the richness of Indigenous voices and cultures. And I think that is one of the things we hopefully can talk about today. And when you came in, did you see the installation outside as you entered the building? The crochet, bright red crocheted pieces on the porte cochere. And that was done by a Métis artist. Her name is Tracy May Chambers. And it's her journey and her hope and healing for Canada that she's working on. So it's really important. And the piece, when you look at it, it evokes struggles of Indigenous people. And it really gives a visual expression of kind of the full scope of Canada's history. And I think it encourages people to stop and take a moment and think about what it means. So, and to ask questions. These are things that we create so that you can ask questions if you don't really understand what something means. It's really important to be able to ask those questions. So when you saw it, maybe you can tell me after what you thought of it or what you think, and how it made you feel. If you have any thoughts on it, you can hopefully talk about it later on as we get into our program. And it's really, asking questions is really a way of bridging between people. Like, if you don't understand who I am, you can ask me to tell you my story. And that way we can establish a better relationship and maybe a more understanding of each other's cultures. And that is what we call reconciliation. So I think these are all very important things. La nous fait questionner, la nous fait jaser, la nous amène à contempler à la vie de différentes façons. C'est ça la réconciliation. So today we're going to be working with Meryl McMaster. And the art that's on the wall there is history and art and how they're connected. And we'll have the pleasure of hearing from Meryl a bit later. And thank you for being with us today, Meryl. And I am also grateful to Elder Solomon Wawatie for being here, and Rachelle Metatawabin for being here, and they will be sharing their experiences and learning with us today as well. So I would like to also thank Brad LaFortune for being here, who will be sharing later on when we have our break a cultural activity, and I think he's going to be dancing, and that'll be up on later this morning. So I just want to maybe talk a little bit about Meryl's work, Murmur. Art there is called Murmur, and it will inspire a unique hands-on project that we are going to do later. I think you will have fun doing it. I'm not sure if you know what it is, so I won't say anything. And it will combine the art that you'll be making, the story, and the history of Indigenous people. And Meryl has said, and I've heard her say in the past, that we're influenced by each other and that our identities are strongly influenced by stories and language. So I want you to think about what influences you as an individual, as a youth. Qu'est-ce que vous influence? Is it your friends? Is it your family? Are you impacted by what you read online, on social media? How does what you learn in the classroom influence your way of thinking? What about what the classroom leaves out? How does the absence of knowledge impact you? And as you probably have learned over time, there has been an absence of information about Indigenous people in this country. There was very little information about the residential schools in Canada and how they affected Indigenous people across the country. And when did you first hear about residential schools? Probably not too long ago. And but Indigenous people knew about this since a very long time. The families of survivors and the missing children, they knew this and how it impacted them. But until recently, it was never taught in schools. I didn't learn any of my Indigenous culture when I was growing up, and it wasn't discussed in this country either. But now it is, and things are changing. Things are changing for the better. So in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released a big report, a final report. It came out with 94 calls to action, 94 calls for reconciliation. With the release of this report, I think Canada's thinking started to shift and people started to talk. And then the unmarked graves came out in the media, and unmarked graves of children who had gone missing from these schools were found, and the voices got louder across the country. People were saying, we need to deal with this. We need to be open and be able to talk about it and resolve this horrendous history of our country so people can heal. Indigenous people are continuing to work on their healing. There's still a lot of trauma involved with the findings of these unmarked graves. And I think it's really important for all of us to understand this history. It's really important for us so that we can learn about not just who we are, but about the cultures and the languages of different people across the country. It's also about diversity. We have a very diverse country. It's not just for us, it's Indigenous people and what happened to us and how we're trying to resolve the issues that are out there. But it's also about other diverse people in this country. We need to give equality, we need to be open, and we need to understand each other so that we can live side by side and respect one another. And as long as we all work at it, it will happen. It's not something that's, when you just talk about it and you don't make the effort, sometimes things stay the same. But I see a lot of effort right now by Canadians. Ordinary Canadians talking about the need to heal and become a country that is more inclusive and respects other cultures, especially Indigenous peoples, who are the first peoples of this country. So there was a time when, like I said, nobody talked about it, but former students of residential schools started to speak up. They found their voice, and they started the discussions, and they talked about the effects of residential schools and the trauma and some of the very terrible things that happened to them, and talked about the treatment that they had in these residential schools. Not a lot of people talked about the missing children who never made it home, but the parents knew that their children never came home. The siblings, the grandmothers, the grandfathers knew that the missing children never made it home. But really, Indigenous people also talk about the positive side, because there is joy in our lives, and the importance of, for instance, revitalizing Indigenous languages is really important to Indigenous people. Our culture and our identity is different from other cultures. I come from the Inuit community, and our culture is even different from First Nations and different from Métis. So cultures, color of your skin doesn't describe who you are. It's what you have as a human being inside is really how you feel and will make you a person that has confidence, that can do whatever you want to do with your life. Everybody has that right to be able to do whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter what it is. If you have that passion and the dream, and it doesn't matter what somebody else is doing. If that's what you want to do as your career and as your life, then you should do that. We should all be happy with ourselves. So la réconciliation, c'est aussi le partage de la beauté et richesse des cultures autochtones. So I guess my biggest message to you today is reconciliation is a process, and something that does not fall to Indigenous peoples alone. It's all of us that need to work on reconciliation. And it doesn't really matter how old we are, Indigenous people and non-Indigenous peoples alike, to make reconciliation work, the healing work, the respect and understanding are part of our daily routine, because reconciliation is a way of life. It's about understanding, and it's not something that ends with a project. Reconciliation is a way of life, and I think you're going to lead the way. I always say that I'd like to include young people in all the discussions that we have, because when I was 28, I got involved in some big decisions we had to make up north in the Arctic, and a lot of days now, when people talk about people that are in their 20s, they think they're too young to be involved, but you should be involved in in things that are affecting you as well. Maybe through your parents at first, but then you have a voice also, so make sure you keep that in mind and lead the way as you think you should lead the way, and we will all make it a better world. So thank you for being here, and I think we'll answer some of your questions a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. An important part of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is the conversations that at times can be difficult. In that spirit, we will begin today's event with a question and answer session in which we hope to engage together in meaningful discussion in a safe space. We have 3 inspiring guests here with us today who will share their experience and their outlook on your questions. But allow us to briefly introduce our guests first.
Alors, pour commencer, introduisons l'aîné Solomon Wawatie. L'aîné Solomon Wawatie fait partie du conseil traditionnel des aînés Anishinaabe. Il a subi 7 ans d'abus dans un pensionnat. À son retour, il est revenu chez lui pour reconnecter avec ses racines. Il contribue activement à préserver les traditions, la culture, la langue en tant que bâtisseur de huttes, gardien du feu, raconteur et bien plus encore. Merci d'être avec nous.
Meryl McMaster is of Nehio Plains Cree from Red Pheasant Cree Nation with Métis, British, and Dutch ancestry, and is a member of the Siksika First Nation. She is an artist well known for her large format self-portraits. Her work Murmur is on the wall right here in front of us and is the inspiration for our activity later this morning.
And finally, we introduce Rachelle Metatawabin. Rachelle works with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition and also as an independent child welfare advocate while sitting on the National Advisory Council on Poverty Reduction. She is a former Crown Ward who aged out of the system when she was 18. As a child of the system, she grew up with different families and communities across Ontario. She currently lives on the unceded territory, Algonquin territory, here in Ottawa, with her 5-year-old daughter. Thank you, Rachelle. So we have a really interesting panel, and we'll proceed with some questions that you've all prepared. But before, allow me to start with an icebreaker question that will address to Elder Solomon, Meryl, and Rachelle. So, from your unique perspectives, what does National Day for Truth and Reconciliation mean to you? We can start. You can start with the microphone.
Hello.
Perfect.
I'm gonna introduce myself. I'm a survivor of the residential school here. I went there 7 years. And I was there from 1964 to 1971. The truth might be a little bit hard on people, but that's the truth. The scars run deep. But I managed to forgive. what has happened to me when I was young. And that's an ugly truth. And it affected all the generations after that. Like I lost culture, which I'm getting back. I think it's important, first of all, to face the truth, although it's not very comfortable, but that's the truth. And that's where the healing begins. And discussion is also important to address the scars that were left in our society. When the healing begins, we're not used to talking about the truth. It's going to be harsh, but it's possible to bring back the balance for the future generations. In nature, we have discovered how they heal. Can I have your feather? Oh, every wing has this. The thick side is the male side. And the thick side helps you rise so you can create the vision. That's man's responsibility. The female side is for the direction. And when you work on yourself, you learn that the stem is respect, love, all the grandmothers' qualities. And the female side is the direction you want to fly in. So the female side is necessary to re-establish what we call the matriarchal society. Like to understand the way our system works with the sun and the moon, water and fire. it's necessary to understand those things. It's going to be a long, hard road, but if the intentions are there, it's going to be a smooth ride for the future generation. That's all I have to say for now, but I'm open to questions. Whether in French or in English, I'm able to answer you. Thank you. Be good.
Thank you.
Is it on?
Yes.
Tanse, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Your Excellency for inviting me to speak. You heard that my English name's Meryl, but I also wanted to share with you my traditional name, which is Apasoisquo, which means Southern Rafter Woman. And so when I think about that opening question about what this day of truth and reconciliation means to me, you know, I think that it's a day to begin this process of learning and understanding and accepting truth. And it's also a time when I think that we come together and we publicly and collectively really commemorate the children that never came home to their families, and also to the survivors of residential schools. I think on this day, well, tomorrow, but leading up to this day and on that day, I think a lot about my family. I think about my father, you know, my grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, and my cousins, you know, who went to residential school or day school, and how that intergenerational trauma really impacted them and also has impacted myself and my daughters. So I think about, you know, that past generation as well as this future generation that is a part of me. So I think on, well, every day, but, you know, specifically on this day, it is to honor and to think about the strength, the resilience, and the dignity of Indigenous peoples, and I think about my relatives. So that's what, you know, I think about a lot, so.
It's on, right? No?
No.
There we go. Okay. Miigwech, thank you. Wache, hello. My name is Rachelle Metatawabin. Just want to say Nakuramic to Her Excellency Marie Simon for having us here today. It's funny when you say icebreaker, I'm always happy about them because they're supposed to be really easy and simple. Like my favorite color is teal, and I don't know, I love cats. But this question for me was a little bit harder to kind of think about because I don't know, from my perspective, in my opinion, I grew up in child welfare, and my grandparents went to St. Mary's Residential School, or St. Anne's Residential School in Fort Albany, and if you've read up on it, they unfortunately used electric chairs with those children and families up there. My mother went to day school in Ontario. Unfortunately, she's no longer here. And like many of us, we've lost so many family members, a lot of aunties, uncles, grandparents, cousins. Within the Child Welfare Agency, so many advocates and mentors are no longer here because the work is hard, it's exhausting. Speaking the truth is, as we know, exhausting and tiring. It's aggravating and it fills us with so much anger. So quite honestly, this weekend, this day isn't really as peaceful as it could be. But it does the one thing that everyone mentions is it does bring community together. And I think that's one of my favorite parts, is that we're able to sit here and having such wonderful people involved and able to sit and listen and, you know, bring that solitude to everyone who is still healing and still kind of working through the process of everything we've lost, everything we've experienced and endured. But more specifically, I really like this day because it reminds me of all the strong people in our lives, all the people that are here, all the elders that provide us with such wisdom and strength. They're helpers that ensure that they can do what they need to do. Our dancers, our artists who are able to help us heal and express those emotions in healthy ways, because quite honestly, I think we've seen too much anger and too much violence, and it's really beautiful that we're all here today. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing about what today means to you, or what that brings up for you as well. So now we're going to turn over to the students. We know that you've all prepared some interesting questions. So just a reminder, students, if you're going to be asking a question, we're going to have the microphones come to you. I'll address you by name. Just maybe stand up when it's your turn. So we're going to start with our first question. It's going to be addressed mainly to the Governor General and to Elder Solomon Wawatie. So we'll now invite Anna from Ashbury, if she could please stand up to ask her question.
I would start by thanking you for having us here and giving us this opportunity. My question for you today is, what do you think it means to bring Indigenous ways of learning into our class?
Of course. The question is, what does it mean to bring Indigenous ways of learning into the classroom?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll start, and then others can join me. I use myself as an example because I'm Indigenous, but when I was growing up, we weren't able to learn about our Indigenous cultures and other Indigenous cultures in Canada. So we didn't know, living in the remote region in the north, in the Arctic, about our own history, about our own. We learned it from our parents and my grandparents, but not in the schools. And I think what's important to include Indigenous teachings and cultures is that we all learn about who we are and how important it is for Indigenous people to have their cultures and their identities also be part of the curriculum in the classroom, so that young people like yourselves, you don't have to be Indigenous, we will learn from each other. It's both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We need to learn more about you as well, and I think it's important for you to learn about Indigenous people. And I think in the class, the balance has never been there. But I think there is work being done, especially in different schools. It's not a unified system across the country, but it sometimes depends on the school itself or the classroom to teach Indigenous but cultures and identity, and to have that as part of your curriculum. So it's not something that's across the country at this point, but I think it's really important, first of all, to have that curriculum taught in all schools for everybody, and also to be able to access history, the real history of the country. I firmly believe that we need to change the history books, not to delete anything, but to increase the knowledge of what Canada is all about, so that we can have a more unified system of education that would include Indigenous teachings and cultures.
A few years ago, a grandfather told me, he said, learn how to read. I read English and French. I write in Algonquin, but that's not what he meant. Reading is learning how to read nature. It's important for us to go back to the laws of nature by learning how to read what nature is telling us. I don't need the news to tell me that there's a climate change. It's all out there. Perhaps people don't know that the turtles are going up north because of the climate change. That's the kind of reading we used to have a long time ago, before the alphabet. But the alphabet taught us to speak English and French and read communication between humans. But it also is important to reconnect with nature. And that's what our education system looks like. That's learning how to read. I understood that. And I wish young people would have access to learning those things by the elders who maintain the culture and the connection with the earth. That's why I think it's important to have Native culture included in the education system for growth, personal growth, and view things in another perspective, such as life, me good.
Thank you very much. So our next question will be addressed mainly to Rachelle and to Meryl. Nous invitons maintenant Dominique du Collège catholique Mer Bleue à venir poser sa question.
Hello. Alors, en ce qui concerne le processus de réconciliation, est-ce qu'il y a un projet en tête que vous aimeriez voir le jour?
So, concerning the process of reconciliation, is there a project in mind that you would like to see come to life? So again, for either Rachelle or Meryl, if you'd like to answer.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. And it's a big question as well. I mean, there's so much. I think so many projects, especially when it comes to the calls to action, that are still in progress and need to, come to fruition. When I think on a national level, I kind of agree with what Her Excellency was talking about and that previous question about education. I think it's so important to have in the curriculum like age-appropriate, history incorporated into classrooms for all different ages, from youngsters to university students, and to work in collaboration with Indigenous people to have our voices heard within these parts of the curriculum. I wasn't really taught about Indigenous history when I was going through school, and that wasn't that long ago. I learned about these harder histories at home from my father and from my parents, and it wasn't really until university where there was a bit more classes that were dedicated to Indigenous ways of knowledge and again histories, where I really saw that introduction to and so I think when I think about that question, I think that education is so important. When I think about projects on an art level, I think kind of this continued push to have Indigenous art shown alongside Canadian and contemporary art to really help kind of combat, the segregation. I think that having our voices within institutions can really help also educate in a creative and different way. And I think, again, that's something that I think about in my field on the art side is bringing our voices into these types of spaces. So.
Thank you. It's a really great question, and I'm very biased about this one. Because, the project that I'm thinking about in particular started about 13 years ago at a youth conference in BC. And this conference had a bunch of children, and well, not children, but young adults and youth who were Indigenous and Métis and Inuit. And we wanted to talk about what it was like to be in care and what we needed from community members, society, different levels of government, or what we wanted to see as we became 18 and no longer received kind of that family support that a lot of people get. And so one of the projects that we thought about was kind of having this holistic hub for youth who age out of the system to live in. And it's not just kind of a regular complex where you have your own home, but ideally every youth would have their own kitchen, bathroom, living space. And then on top of that, you would have your services that you would normally see, that you would have growing up. So for instance, you would have a computer lab that your fellow youth could help you with, or other mentors or advocates or friends could say, you want to work on a resume, or you want to just learn some things together, let's do that. You'd have a kitchen, so you could learn how to cook together, so it's a community space. You'd have a laundry, because unfortunately that's not something a lot of youth in care learn how to do. And so a lot of these great services like that, and a community room, which I think is one of the best parts, because part of this community room would to involve community members, not just Indigenous folks, but it would be whoever wants to be involved, whoever wants to share and learn, whoever wants to dance and create, just kind of help these young individuals who weren't often given the same opportunities that people have to live with people who genuinely care when you're sick or when you have to miss out on work, So this hub came from this thought, this process. There are some buildings, one's in BC, there's another in Thunder Bay. And we really just want more of these across Canada, because as we know, there is an overrepresentation of Indigenous youth in care, but also aging out. And Unfortunately, a lot of them did come from residential schools and day schools. So it would be really great, and it involves a lot of community members to kind of come forward and help and give voice and opportunity to those who really, really need it.
That's great. Thank you so much for your thoughts. This last question will be addressed mainly to Meryl. So we would like to invite Aiden from Nepean High School to ask their question.
Okay. What is the importance of having art in major institutions that focuses specifically on reconciliation?
That's a great question. Well, I think for many, many years, Indigenous history has been, our story had been told by institutions, and many artists before me have fought really hard to have our voice within these spaces. And, you know, I think what's important is having our work in these spaces helps to rewrite these histories that have been written for us. And just having our first person voice, again, represented and heard. When I think about when I was younger, I had a lot of trouble in school. I had dyslexia, and I always gravitated to learning visually. And I think that's also one reason why I gravitated towards art, is to express myself, not through words, but through this visual form. And I think that art has a way of kind of transporting someone out of, you know, one's everyday life, and having someone able to reflect on different ideas in a new way, different from when we're hearing, you know, maybe news stories on the radio or online. Art has a different way of kind of maybe presenting these harder topics. And so I think having work about reconciliation, you know, kind of part of the ideas within the work, I think is really important to have in spaces, again, like major institutions and galleries and banks. People will, you know, come across these works in different ways, and it just, again, just opens up new conversations for people to have, so.
Thank you so much. This does conclude our question and answer period for today, but we know that there's many questions amongst the students. We were fortunate enough to see some of the questions that you had ahead of time, so we know that you're very curious. So we encourage you during the second portion of this morning, while we're working away to pose your questions to our speakers, to our guests, if they're around. So let's please give a big round of applause to our speakers today. We want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories, for sharing from the heart. I know Edith and I were kind of whispering amongst ourselves about some of the great points that you brought up and ways that it's shifted our thinking as well. So we hope that you students also have expanded your knowledge and expanded your experience today.
Alors, la suite de notre événement sera une démonstration de gigue métis par Brad Lafortune, et ceci se déroulera dans la salle de l'attente, juste de l'autre côté de la résidence. Alors, on vous inviterait à vous déplacer vers la salle de l'attente, tous ensemble. Si vous aviez vos casques d'écoute, juste les laisser sur ou sous votre chaise, et on se voit dans la salle de l'attente. Merci.